Hi, my name is Michael Smook. It's February 4th, it's a Sunday, and we're in the year 2018. I'm speaking to you from my home in Forest Hills, New York. Forest Hills is in Queens County, which is an outer borough of the city of New York, of course. The topic of today's conversation relates to episode 22, and it's entitled I'm Just Getting Started. And what we're doing today is we're celebrating my second anniversary of Internet projects. During that time, we've posted 6 essays on Michael Smook Google Plus, and it's entitled We're All in This Together. And this being the 22nd essay, we're on 2 links on YouTube and some are on Vimeo. So what we're going to be doing is, and this is chapter 1, we're going to outline what the talk is today about celebrating my anniversary. So we can give it a proper celebration. Let me give you the outline of what we're going to be talking about today. So chapter 2 is entitled Maneuvering Past Obstacles. And I'll be talking to you about healthcare issues and stressors at work in 2013 and 14. I was able to, with help from family, friends, and professionals, I was able to overcome. And it's important and relates to this story because it sent me on a trajectory in 2015 and 16 whereby I was in peak physical and emotional health, and I was eager to take on new challenges that were intellectual in nature. So that's chapter 2. Chapter 3 is entitled Why Essays and Videos. And in chapter 3, we'll talk about my motivation for doing these talks, the types of subject matter we cover, the litmus test for any kind of internet project, whether it's an essay or a talk. And we'll also discuss why this is unexpectedly, and it's a creative endeavor. And it's very encouraging to come up with either borrow someone else's idea or come up with something that's original. And I feel, and I mean this with great humility, but I feel when I come away with that I have something to offer the world, and it's fun doing. So that about covers chapter 3. Chapter 4 is entitled Comments from Reviewers. And the first part of chapter 4 is entitled The 15 to 20-Second Rule. And we'll discuss that, and then we'll discuss the next part is called General Comments, where we'll discuss praise received, criticisms, constructive criticisms, and the most interesting part is non-responses from potential viewers. And then the last chapter we'll talk about is entitled Next Steps, and I'll discuss what may or may not happen in the future regarding the major categories. The major categories are memoirs or civics. And then before we say goodbye, I'll define for you how I find a measure of happiness working on these endeavors. And I'll give you my philosophy. And then we'll say goodbye. So now that we've covered chapter 1 and I've given you an outline so we can properly celebrate 2 years of internet projects, let's move forward together. The best way to tell a story regarding what was going on with me in 2013 and 14 is to dive right in the middle. And then we'll discuss what happened before, during, and after. What we're diving back in the middle concerns health issues. January 31st, 2014, I collapsed at work. I had 2 serious problems that could have killed me that day. Fortunately, I collapsed in front of coworkers. They called 911, and an ambulance brought me across the street, 300 or 400 feet, to a medical center. And fortunately for me, there was a team of highly skilled medical professionals who were able to quickly diagnose what could have killed me, and they provided me with effective medical attention and took heroic measures to save my life. They stabilized me and brought me from the emergency room to intensive care. So then what happened is after about 6 days I was released. I took medicine at home. I saw my doctors outside of my home. Visiting nurse service came into my home frequently, and then overall, I was out of work for about 5 weeks. And then over the next 3 to 4 months, what happened was between on one end of the spectrum, I have surgeons, and on the other end of the spectrum is my internist, and in the middle are medical specialists, subspecialists I was seeing. They were running tests, and they were going back and forth. And it was finally determined what was efficacious treatment for me, and it was decided that I needed to go in for a follow-up stay, which would be surgery. Again, I was in the hospital for 6 days, and the recuperation took me more than twice as long. It was at least 8 or 9 weeks. And what I could tell you from surviving near-death experiences is that every day I have a great appreciation of being alive. I have an enhanced sense of spirituality, and I get out of bed every day and I look in the mirror and I say to myself, thank God I'm alive. So if you have a box under each of them, you could check all of them and relate it to me. So every day I'm very thankful that I'm alive, and I thank God I'm alive. Now we've discussed health issues. Let's discuss work-related stressors and how I was able to manage this situation before, during, and after the acute phases of the health issues. This is the thing. I was reporting to somebody who wasn't officially my supervisor. Unofficially, I was somewhat path dependent on assignments from this woman. She and I both reported to the same boss who signed our time cards and performed our annual evaluations. And sometime in 2013, it became apparent that our relation reached an untenable phase. And there was, she would say hurtful things, slanderous things, and it was hurting my morale. I was pretending that it didn't. And she may or may not have known it, but she was instilling a measure of fear inside me. And I knew enough about this person from periods of time where we were on better terms, and she would tell me her life story. She would tell me her life story, and I would try to tell her as little as possible. So I knew she had unresolved daddy issues. So what I did is I went back into therapy, and I had been away from talk therapy for maybe 3 months, and my therapist, I can't tell you exactly what we spoke about because I don't quite remember. I can't tell you for how long we spoke, but I do know, and I'm still in therapy, but I do know that after a period of time, because of therapy, I went into work every day. Even on the worst days after I started therapy, I was no longer fearful of my harasser. And so the thing about it is, we didn't talk about specific strategies in therapy, but I improvised because I'm calmer and I've worked in the world of work for many decades. I was able to improvise and figure out what I needed to do to manage this relationship. I'll give you one example. I was out of work for 2.5 months. I came back on September 7th, 2014. She dropped by my office. She gave me a big bear hug. Hello. I didn't want to hug her, but I did it. And then she said, come up to my office for a quick chat. I'm on the 4th floor. She's on the 12th floor. I took the elevator up into her office. It's just me and my coworker. And we've had many conversations, especially, and I remember the ones, especially when things started to go bad. And once again, the conversation, after initial pleasantries, it started to go in the wrong direction. And I reached a point where I realized no amount of things that I could say would get us back on track into a productive conversation. It was a dysfunctional conversation. And I did something that day that I've never done in 40 years of work. I'll probably never do again. And to my viewers, I would advise you to think about it before you do it. But this is what I did. She was in mid-sentence, and I realized this This is a dysfunctional conversation. So I stood up while she's in mid-sentence, no eye contact, and I simply walked out of the office. I walked to the elevator and I went back to my office on the fourth floor. And I spent the next hour writing about what happened. And then a day or two later, I reviewed it with coworkers. So in a sense, what I was building was a paper trail if she ever decided to bring me up on charges. And indirectly, my coworkers were witnesses to, at least they could testify to my state of mind and have some background information as to what happened. So I'm building up documentation in the best way I could. And we had other situations. I never walked out of a meeting, but before and after that particular event, when we were having dysfunctional conversations, what I would simply do was I would smile. I would paint on my face, my expression, paint on my face a Mona Lisa smile, barely a smile. You could barely tell that I was smiling. And I recall on one occasion, she said to me, "Michael, the smile on your face is really pissing me off." And of course, I did what I did before. I went back to my office after the meeting and I wrote down everything that was discussed in that meeting. If I don't document it, and a day, a week, a month, a year, 2 years go by, that meeting never happened. There were no witnesses. It wasn't recorded. And so the thing about it is that's what I did to protect myself. And I also spoke to my coworkers. Now, the thing is that while I was going through all this, in addition to getting healthier, talk therapy, being in the work arena and in my own quiet way battling it out, what I was doing was I was thinking a lot about Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi, who believed in nonviolent passive resistance, and I was trying to align myself with these great men. And I also Googled Jesus Christ's Sermon on the Mount about turning the other cheek, and I was doing that as well. So it sounds cliche, but I mean it sincerely. I basically needed to purge myself full of any kind of anger and to feel sympathy and at times empathy, because I have not lived a perfect life. And so it got me to a better place. So what happened with my harasser was she had health issues. She took extended medical leave, and in 2015 she retired. So the fact that we never got to have conversations and work through these matters, these are missed opportunities. And but basically what we've done is we've summarized maneuvering past obstacles and how I handled what happened to me in 2013 and 14, and emerging in 2015 and 16. I'm healthier physically, emotionally, and I'm eager to take on new challenges, and my mind is sharp, and that's what leads us to these internet projects. So now that we've covered Chapter 2, let's move on to Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is entitled Why Essays and Videos. You have to understand this about my career. I was a government major in college, political science and public administration. It took me 9 years of the road less traveled to get a job in government. I was hired in 1989. And then in the 90s and the first decade of the 21st century, I was working, it didn't happen overnight, but over time, I was able to work on projects that nobody in the 200 history of my agency ever did before. And I'm very proud of that work. And I felt, in the words of management theorist Abraham Maslow, that I was self-actualizing. So I was very excited about my work. I was well rested, highly motivated, and every day I came into work, I came into work a little early. Sometimes I worked through lunch. Sometimes I stay late. Sometimes I'd bring work at home. I wasn't burnt out. I was very excited for what I was doing. So the thing about it is, in the latter part of the first decade of the 21st century and the early years of the second decade, this is the second decade we're right in now, most of what I really enjoyed about working in government, municipal government, was through no fault of my own, was taken away from me. And the thing about that is, some people say everything happens for a reason. Well, I have a slightly nuanced take on that. What happened is many people who I work closely with, some people retired, some people transferred to other units, some people were doing other different kinds of work, some people didn't have their contracts renewed, some people passed away. There were many reasons why people who were defenders of mine, who were knew the body of work that I had done and what I brought to the table, they were no longer there. So that's the reason why the world changed underneath my feet, even though it had nothing to do with whether I was doing a good job or a bad job. It's just, it is what it is. I went into work every day and the world disappeared underneath my feet, and the responsibilities that I most enjoyed were eviscerated. And I moved over from drafting contracts and doing Medicaid and Medicare policy and chairing committees to hire outside contractors, doing very interesting work and reporting to senior managers. Also, during the good years, I passed rarely given and challenging civil service exams. And the thing is, I was never very good at standardized tests, but I worked extra hard from the materials the union gave me, from the civil service bookstore. Every day I would practice for an hour or two, and it sharpened my mind. And I was able to pass two rarely given, challenging promotional civil service exams. And among the people in my agency who passed, it was a citywide exam, but the people who passed, I was in the top 20%. So, and what happened is the bosses I reported to, they promoted me and they made me permanent on two separate occasions. So it's a feather in my cap. It's some additional, it's additional money. And in the parlance of civil service speak, my union president said to me, "What you now have is real property value." So I'm very thankful for that. And also, I attended meetings with health commissioners who went on to work for Presidents Clinton and Obama. They knew of my work, and it was a very exciting time to be. And so what happened is, when all these responsibilities were taken away from me, I'm still making the same salary, and except cost of living increases and longevity increases. So for a long time, I was not in a good place, and I was depressed. And it took me a long time to figure out that how I could turn negatives into positives. It's like the old story about life hands you lemons, and you respond by making lemonade. And it took me a long, long time to figure that out. And in the last 2 years, that's what I did, and that's why I find a measure of happiness, and that's why we're celebrating today, to talk about this. So now let's talk about the topics that I talk about and the litmus test. The topics I talk about are either two types. They're either memoirs or civics. Memoirs, just calling it memoirs is rather self-explanatory. What memoirs about is my memories of the past, the present, and lessons learned and my hopes for the future. Civics relates to more of a textbook definition, is what are the things you need to know to prepare yourself to be a citizen. And that relates to the home you grow up in, what you learn from your parents and your siblings, what you learn, let's say you go to public school, K through 12, what you learn through your religion, what you learn in religious education, what you learn in trade schools, colleges, graduate schools, professional schools, so you can get a job, serve on a jury, vote, and maybe it's your option. Maybe you'll get married and have kids. So I talk about civics, and what keeps me sharp about civics is I read the New York Times Monday to Friday. In the morning I read the stories, and then during the day the paper, the articles are updated. So what I have on my phone is a virtual newspaper. New York Times is arguably the best newspaper, or one of the best newspapers in the country. So I read the New York Times Monday to Friday. and not so much on the weekends because I'm working on internet projects, or I'm reading a book, or I'm doing some other things. So it's good to rest my mind, at least in terms of the news. But by reading the newspapers, it gives me ideas about civics and what's going on in the world, and it gives me ideas about future talks or future essays. So in terms of now we've talked about the subject matter, the litmus test for me determining what's worth doing. It needs to be the subject matter for any topic, essays or videos. It needs to be interesting, informative. It needs to be relevant. It needs to be meaningful, and it needs to be fun. If you pull all that together, what that means is it must resonate inside me, which means in a positive way. I need to be excited about the subject matter, and it must give me a measure of happiness. Now, if I feel a measure of happiness, maybe you, my viewers, might feel the same. So that's the litmus test for any talk or any essay I ever write. I need to be excited about it. So it's in terms of creative, either the creativity is in either one or two ways. Either I'll borrow an idea from a columnist or a scholar, or sometimes I'll come up with something on my own. I'll take ownership of it. I haven't patented or copyrighted it, but I'll take own of it myself. And let me give you one example. We're on vacation in the Southwest. We're at a local college. In the morning, we'd go to this local college, and my wife would go there to play piano because she gives recitals. And I would go there. I was not in a practice room. I was in an open area every morning practicing my first episodes 1 and 2. The Wallenberg video, episode number 1, and the Hollywood Blacklist, episode 2. Every day I'd practice for a couple hours. Students would pass me, and when they're passing me, I would look ahead and I wouldn't stop talking. But over time, students got to, I was a familiar person in this department in the outer lobby. And students would come up to me and they'd ask me questions. And that's where the creative part comes in. One day, a student comes up to me and he says, what's your philosophy? And the interesting thing is nobody has ever asked me that question. And before words were going to come out of my mouth, and seconds before I spoke, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to say. But what I said it rather succinctly, but it was well thought out and I think insightful. And this is what I told him. And this is where the creative part comes in. What I said is my inspiration and who I align myself is the biblical Joseph from the Old Testament. I align myself with him because he can interpret dreams, had the gift of prophecy. He forgave his brothers for selling him into slavery. And he also, when he was appointed prime minister by the Pharaoh during 7 years of bounty, he ordered the empire of Egypt to save grain. So when they had 7 years of famine, Egypt was ready, and it saved the lives of millions of people and kept them going. And so Joseph is synonymous with taking the long view. Now look, the way we live our lives, it's really the immediate and the intermediate times. We need to go to work. We need to get our laundry done. We need to take care of business so we could have a roof over our heads, clothes on our back, food in our stomachs, families taken care of. So it's very easy to just get lost in the day-to-day, and I'm no exception. I do that too. But in terms of my philosophies, secular, theological, personal, political, professional, I try to take the long view. I try to take a step back, sometimes a deep breath, and when people ask me questions, I try to take the long view. And that's how I'm wired. That's how I think. And how did I get it? Well, perhaps part of the answer is I'm a product of the environment I was raised in. And I'm very thankful for that. So that's a creative that's a creative process working on these things, and it's unexpected. When I started on these things, I had no idea that I would come up with creative ideas, and I have lots of ideas to discuss with you. But to generate this talk today, it's going to be about 30 minutes. I rehearsed it about 100 times, so I had to edit out a lot of the other creative things that I've thought about, that I've channeled into the previous 21 talks today. So time prevents us from going into details about why working on internet projects, essays, and videos is a creative endeavor. And I mean this in with great humility, but what I've belatedly found out that by synthesizing this material and doing these talks, I think I've figured out that maybe I have something to offer the world. And at the same time, I say that with humility, because I stick to my daily affirmations every day. And one of them is, it's far less important that in any conversation, communication I have with anyone, that they think I'm smart, funny, or if we disagree, then I'm right. It's far more important that my counterpart knows that they've been listened to and they've been respected. So now then, chapter 3, why essays and videos, we've summarized my motivation, the subject matter we do, the litmus test for talks, and why this is a creative process. So we've covered a lot very quickly. And now let's move on to chapter 4, which is entitled comments, feedback from viewers. Now, let's first start. The first part of this two-part in chapter 4 is the 15 to 20 second rule. Again, you have to understand something else. I have friends who watch these talks, and they read my essays, and we could talk about issues. We're in agreement on many things. We disagree on some things. Other things we just need to continue to review on a regular basis. But, we could talk all night. And my wife and I have other friends, and this is no disrespect for them, but it's different. These friends, we go out and we talk about anything but what's going on in the news. We talk about raising our children. We talk about going on vacation, Broadway shows we'd like to see, and what we want to do in the summer we belong to a pool club, and what we like to do. We talk about anything about what's going on in the news, but I know that these friends, they do watch my videos, not all of them, occasionally, and they know that I think about things. And sometimes I'm always ready to get asked one question by one of our friends in the middle of a conversation. And I know that they'll sometimes ask me an incredibly complex question, and I know that they basically want to hear a very short reply, and I feel compelled to respond to the question with something far more substantive than a joke or something equivalent to fluff. What I do is I think about in advance what I want to say to people. And I'll give you one example. There are many examples, but let me give you one. We only have time for one example. A year and a half ago, my wife and I are out to lunch with some friends. And among our friends, we're having another one of these conversations where we talk about anything about current events. But one of our friends, she says to me, Michael, she says to me, she doesn't even address it initially to me. She says, I think it's terrible what Obama did. They condemned Israel in the United States. The United States always vetoes the condemnation, and they save Israel from international problems. And instead, the United States abstained. I think Obama's not doing his job. I think he's anti-Israel, and I think this is just terrible. And then she says, what do you think, Michael? And so I had 20 seconds to give an answer of a terribly complex question. It was more of an articulation of feelings and frustrations, and buried in there was a question. So this is what I said in about 20 seconds, maybe 25. I said, look, the land for peace between Palestinian Arabs and Israel and the Arab world is for the politicians and the diplomats. That's above my pay grade. My vision for a permanent peace in the Middle East is economics And I have ideas. I could drill down at a very deep level. If one day you want to talk about it, my door is always open for you, today or anytime. And what kind of response did I get? A look of surprise and basically, okay. So I answered the question within 15 to 20 or 25 seconds, and I kept it short. And because I feel compelled to give a good answer, I was ready, and I felt better by giving a good answer and keeping it open for further conversation. So that's the 15 to 20-second rule. And so, I have a number of daily affirmations. Another one that keeps me in check is I tell myself all the time, talk less, listen more, ask thoughtful questions. So this way I stay honest with myself, and I stop looking for validation from other people, and I stay focused, and I understand that listening is a much underappreciated communication skill. When people are talking to me, they're doing two things. They're either talking about thoughts or they're talking about feelings. And I become a whole lot smarter when I talk less and listen more. And so I try to stay true to that every day. And I need to learn that every day because I'm far from a perfect person, and I'm not immune to flattery nor occasional narcissism. And I try to stay honest with myself. So now that we've talked about the first part of feedback from viewers and the 15 to 20-second rule, let's talk about general comments. I've received on separate YouTube talks comments from Facebook viewers as well. And there are two comments they use with an economy of words. They're not embellished. They're rather short. And these are people who listen to not all of my talks, but a number of them. And they understand where I'm coming from. And the feedback I receive means a lot to me. One commentator wrote in as few words as possible, but it meant a lot to me. He said, Michael, as a thinker and a speaker, I really appreciate your non-confrontational approach. And then another viewer said, he wrote quite a bit, but then at the end he said, and this always stayed with me, he said, please continue to surprise me. And those are the compliments I've received that mean the most to me. And it's very rewarding to receive that kind of feedback. I haven't asked for that feedback, but I received it, and from the bottom of my heart, it's much appreciated. Now, in terms of criticism, I'll call it constructive criticism. I receive all sorts of feedback from people about the lighting, the camera angles, the length of my talk, the tone of my voice, and so on and so forth. And I almost always thank people for their feedback. And if people, I feel that they want more, and I'm not ready to act on what they want. Sometimes the feedback I receive, I act on almost immediately. Sometimes I'm not so sure. And what I tell people when they give me feedback that I may or may not agree with, I say, let me sleep on it. Let me think about it. So, I always try to be polite, and I'm thankful for any feedback I receive. And then now let's talk about the last one, and it's the most interesting one. It's about non-responses. There are some people I've known for many years. We talk about what's going on in the world, and for a period of time, I continually sent copies of essays or videos, and I received non-responses. And I try to stay honest with myself. And this is something I need to constantly remind myself all the time. So if there are people out there who I send videos, maybe they don't watch it, or don't watch it. I never get any kind of feedback. Maybe I'm eager to get feedback, but the problem is not with the people I send it to. The problem is with me. So that's something I need to constantly remind myself. And what gets to the heart of the issue is I work on these projects because it's sort of a form of therapy for me. And if I didn't do these projects, I would probably I'd probably walk around angry a lot, underutilized at work, and I wouldn't even know why. So the feedback I received, whether it's in particular, whether it's praise or constructive criticism, it's much appreciated, and that's extra. And so for anyone out there who might view this video and they're listening to me talk now, please understand that it's something I'm working on all the time, and it's not your problem, it's my problem. So that about covers feedback from viewers. Now let's go to chapter 5, the last chapter, next projects. Now, next projects are the thing about the memoirs. They just sort of happen. Sometimes I'm working on a talk. I was going to do episode 21, and we were going to talk about philosophy. And I'm in meetup groups, and we talk sometimes about what's going on in the world. And I did something atypical for me, and I lost my temper. And I was annoyed with myself for losing my temper. So, it's like borrowing a line from a Seinfeld episode. Well, that's an episode. I lost my temper. I lost it. Which is in contrast to all this philosophy that I espouse. So the fact is that the memoirs just sort of come to me, and so the other kinds of subject matter we could talk about is civics. Reading the New York Times Monday to Friday, I save articles and I come up with new ideas. So in terms of what's going on at the national or international level, it's a fascinating time to live. And I'm not just talking about the president or the Congress, what's going on in Washington. I'm thinking about space exploration, manned and unmanned, cyber issues, challenges and opportunities, and so many other topics at the national and international level. At the local and state level, we live in Queens and we work in Brooklyn and Manhattan, and it's the largest city in the United States. And so between what's happening at the municipal level throughout the state, there are so many things that we could talk about. The New York City subway. If the New York City is a body, the subway is the lifeblood that keeps it running, and it needs to be rebuilt. And there are cost-effective ways of rebuilding it by saving half the money and building underground subways per mile. There are people who think about and drill down into cost-effective, utilitarian, greatest good for the greatest number way of doing it. And there are also, if the federal, state, and local government don't have the money, there are other deeper pockets to rebuild the subway system. There's so many other topics in the city of New York and throughout the state: homelessness, low income and lower middle class, affordable housing for people. There are so many other topics to talk about, and these are things after we're finished this talk. Sometime, it could be a day, a week, a month, 2 months later, I'll start working on something new. And we'll do something, and hopefully it will resonate, and it will definitely resonate with me, and it will resonate with you as well. Hopefully it will as well. So now, before we say goodbye, let me tell you why working on these talks brings me a measure of happiness. There are many stories I could have told, and I needed to settle on one. And this is the thing. I'm going back to the times of the ancient Greeks and Romans. There was a fictional story about a man named Sisyphus who was condemned to roll a boulder up a hill, and at the end of his workday, the boulder would roll back to the bottom of the hill, or maybe a valley. And so the thing about it is, that's how I view life. A lot of times we work, we try, we fail, we pick ourselves up, we dust ourselves off, we get back in there every day. And the thing about it is, I feel the same way about working on these internet endeavors. Sometimes some talks are better than the others, and for a period of time between researching, writing, rehearsing, recording, posting, some things come very quickly. Many of them are a long, hard slog before it becomes really good. And so it's that's working on these projects is my boulder. and then I feel a measure of happiness for a period of time, and then it dissipates, and I need to go back and do it again. And just to add to this story, there was a philosopher, he wrote in the 40s, 50s, into the 60s. He won a Nobel Prize for Literature. He was a philosopher by the name of Albert Camus, and he was a Frenchman and an Algerian. And Camus said that he could imagine that for however momentarily, he could imagine that when Sisyphus rolled that boulder to the top of the hill, however temporary it was, I'm not quoting Camus word for word, but however temporary it was, he could imagine that Sisyphus felt some happiness. And I align with the myth of Sisyphus, the story, and Camus' interpretation of it. And it helps me in my life deal with all sorts of things, and sometimes a lot of it is frustration and lack of success, or temporary success, and then I have to do it all over again, like work on a new talk. So we've covered just about everything we wanted to do today. We've celebrated 2 years of internet projects, Google Plus essays, Facebook YouTube, and Vimeo talks. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you for sticking with me and listening to this talk. Today is February 4th. It's a Sunday, and we're in the year 2018. I'm speaking to you from my home in Forest Hills, New York. Forest Hills is in Queens County, which is an outer borough of the city of New York. Today we've spoken about episode 22. I'm just getting started. So I'll leave you with this. Until next time, goodbye and good luck.